Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversation With, where I have conversations with people and organizations around Europe that work on the issues that affect us all. I'm Julius. I'm the editor-in-chief of the European Correspondent. And today I will be talking with Cassandra Melvin, who is the Senior Director of Business Development and Operations at SEMI and board chair of the European Chips Diversity Alliance. I'm very excited to have you here with us. We will talk about something that increasingly is in our everyday life, in almost everything that we do, which is chips. Chips power everything. I'm not talking about the food, even though they power me sometimes, but I'm talking about the chips in our phones and our laptops, from your smartphone to your fridge. Everything has chips, and Europe only makes a tiny, tiny fraction of them at the moment. We depend to a large extent on China and other countries to get those semiconductors. That ideally changes soon. And today, among other things, we will find out how. So welcome, Cassandra. And
Thank
to
you.
start with, I would ask you, what are semiconductors and why do they matter to our daily lives?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So semiconductors are materials like silicon that have properties that can act as both a conductor, which allows the flow of electricity, and an insulator, which blocks the flow of electricity. And by carefully engineering them, we can turn this kind of in-between state or this in-between behavior into extremely precise on-off switches, which are called transistors. And chips, which are in all modern devices and virtually everything around us, they contain billions of transistors, those on-off switches. There are many examples of chips. There's logic chips that do computation, CPUs, GPUs, AI accelerators. There's memory chips that store data, camera or image sensors, accelerometers, temperature sensors, power chips that efficiently convert and control electricity, for example, in electric vehicles. And why do they matter? Well, you've said it yourself, and I mentioned it before, they're in everything. So your phone, your laptop, your TV, car, washing machine, basically everything that you use that has a button to turn on or off is basically a collection of transistors or chips wrapped in plastic and metal. So in cars, there are microcontrollers, there are sensors, power electronics that control everything from the engine management and braking, airbags, entertainment, and also autonomous driving. And in healthcare, which is really interesting, chips power the MRI machines, the pacemakers, insulin pumps, diagnostic devices, and even the cloud systems that store the medical records. So, and I could go on, but essentially chips are all around us. And they're in everything that we use on a daily basis. And when chips were in short supply during the pandemic, for example, entire factories had to shut down, not because of steel or plastics or other materials, but because of a few missing microcontrollers that were at the time worth only a few euros. And that's how critical semiconductors are to modern life and also to the economy.
Thank you, Cassandra. Now, Europe depends on chips mainly from Taiwan. I believe Taiwan produces the world's vast majority of those chips, if I'm not mistaken. How can Europe scale that up? How difficult is it to produce those chips, and what does that dependency do to Europe?
Yeah, well, there is currently a dependency, and for Europe to be more resilient, it doesn't necessarily mean producing everything at home, in this case, Europe. It means reducing dangerous single points of failure, mitigating supply chain risks, having credible alternatives when something goes wrong. And so for Europe, that means, for example, implementing the CHIPS Act 2.0 to ensuring that it better supports the whole ecosystem, from design, equipment, materials, to advanced packaging. Not just the large fabs, as was the case, many believe, with the first CHIPS Act. An upgraded CHIPS Act should also provide easier access to funding. Europe needs to play to European strengths instead of copying what has proven successful in Taiwan. So Taiwan dominates leading edge foundry manufacturing. Europe is strong in automotive, industrial, power electronics, and equipment. And a smart resilience strategy for Europe builds redundancy in those critical segments for Europe, while partnering with like-minded countries for others. And there are other things to consider: diversifying suppliers and locations, for example, and encouraging foreign direct investment. So encouraging companies like TSMC, excuse me, and Intel and others to invest and build capacity in Europe is a very important solution, along with strengthening European players. But at the same time, Europe does need collaboration with key global markets, for example, in Asia and in North America, to ensure that there's transparent trade, and in the event of a crisis, which we have experienced in the recent years, not only for chips, but also for materials and equipment. And also investing in skills is one way that Europe can be more resilient. So a fab can be built in a few years, but building a skilled, diverse workforce can take a decade or even longer. And that's why initiatives such as the European Chips Diversity Alliance or the European Chip Skills Academy focus so heavily on talent. Talent is a key part of Europe's future strategy for building up manufacturing capacity.
Yeah, thanks. We'll get into the skills and the talent in a little bit. What are more broadly the challenges that the industry faces when it wants to build that capacity and reduce reliance on other countries? What are the main challenges that we face here in Europe?
Well, some of the challenges are global, and some are especially acute in Europe. So there's the issue of scale and investment, or rather the gap of scale and investment, particularly in Europe. So Europe currently accounts for less than 10% of global manufacturing capacity, and this is down from around 20% in the 1990s. And the European Chips Act, the original one, references ambitions to increase from around 8% to 20% of global manufacturing capacity by 2030. So this is capturing 20% of the global market. And the competing regions like the United States, Taiwan, Korea, and China, they are investing hundreds of billions in subsidies and incentives. And Europe's Chips Act mobilizes tens of billions, which is significant, but it's still smaller in scale and fragmented. And so that's one of the issues already. And I'll talk a bit more about fragmentation as well, because in Europe, we have a very unique issue with regards to fragmentation and bureaucracy, because we're not one country, we're a collection of countries. So funding often runs through national schemes that require EU approval, and companies face different rules from country to country, which can slow the decision-making process and also the launch of the projects. And this is one of the drivers for calls for a more pragmatic and accessible Chips Act 2.0. Another issue, which I touched upon earlier, is the talent shortage. And it's estimated that hundreds of thousands of additional skilled workers will be needed by 2030, particularly if we want to increase that manufacturing capacity. And some reports suggest that there will be over 65,000 unfilled roles if we don't make progress soon. And a recent skills report from the European Chip Skills Academy shows that approximately 30% of the current workforce may retire by 2030. So that will leave a huge skills gap and talent shortage. And the graduate inflow into the industry is less than 1% per year. So you can see kind of there the disconnect. We also have the challenges of energy and cost competitiveness. So fabs are extremely energy intensive, and high energy prices and complex permitting in Europe can make Europe less attractive than other locations where power is cheaper and regulations are smoother. Or more easy to navigate.
Yeah. Now, talent is a huge challenge, and 100,000 people, or what you said, that are needed, over 65,000 unfilled roles potentially. What can the EU, what should Europe do to fill that gap? What is the next thing that now lawmakers, both on the European but perhaps also on the national level, need to consider to close that shortage?
Well, there's a few things. Some of them are more complex than others. So we have competence sensors that are currently being built or have been built throughout Europe, and those are very important for upskilling. But we need closer collaboration with industry and academia, and particularly revisiting the curricula because while we have excellent universities throughout Europe, the curricula might not reflect the current needs of the industry because technology has evolved so much over the years. And projects like the
So that
European Chip
means
Skills
adding
Academy,
more. That means adding more curriculum, adding different study programs.
or perhaps just updating them, or even having industry veterans take part in educating the next generation. So having professors hand over their classroom to retired, for example, former industry professionals who are very knowledgeable and can shed some light on what are the current needs.
Yeah. Thanks. Now, you work with the European Chip Diversity Alliance, which focuses mainly on attracting people to the tech sector at large, specifically chips that maybe are usually not part of that workforce. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the alliance, how it started, and what its mission is.
Yes, absolutely. So the European Chip Skills Diversity Alliance is a European funded initiative that is coordinated by SEMI-Europe, and it was launched in 2024 with a 3-year grant of 1.5 million, and it brings together partners from industry, education, and also research, 11 in total in terms of the consortium partners, but then we have countless associate partners as well. And I had mentioned earlier about the European Chips Act's ambitions to increase the global market share, but at the same time, the current workforce doesn't reflect society. So different, underrepresented groups, women, people from diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds, even career changers, they're underrepresented in technical and leadership roles. So ECDA's mission is to build a more diverse, inclusive, and attractive European microelectronics workforce by lowering the barriers for underrepresented groups to participate and hopefully to supply the missing talent that Europe urgently needs for growth.
And why should they do so? Why should women and underrepresented group in the industry consider career in
Well,
the
the
chip industry?
semiconductor industry is a very exciting industry. One might say it's the most exciting industry, and it's a key enabler for every other industry and every technology that exists today. We already discussed how chips are everywhere, but separate from that, there's high demand and there's strong career prospects. So the shortage, we've discussed it, it's backed by data. There are so many positions that are opening up over the next years that there's great opportunity for people to enter in all kinds of roles. So it's not just technicians in engineering or data scientists, but also policy experts. We need people in design, software, equipment, sustainability, sales, marketing, HR, etc. And what's really interesting about this industry, something I've experienced firsthand, is that you can kind of change paths and try something completely different. So I moved from a business development role into a product management role and then into an operations role. And so you have an exciting opportunity to try different things. Separate from that, it's a global industry. And so you have the opportunity to meet people from many different cultures, to travel the world, and it's really exciting.
Thank you. What would you say is the most exciting thing that in the industry is maybe currently being built, or that people that may consider a career in the chip industry could be building? What is the thing that you would like to see and you're the most excited about?
That's a good question. Well, my answer to that is twofold. I think particularly for the younger generation, the idea of sustainability is really attractive. And so knowing that if you enter the industry, you can be a part of, helping to solve climate-related issues. From a technical point of view, something that I'm really excited in are humanoid robots. Excited and what's great about humanoid...
A bit frightened as well, no?
Well, I don't know. I feel like we have things under control, but humanoid robots are very interesting. They combine advanced AI, sensors, and mechanics to mirror human abilities. And that makes them, in my opinion, very fascinating and adaptable. And there's huge potential for them. For example, in elder care or education, even in supporting society to with regards to like hazardous environment work, things that, perhaps humans don't want to be subjected to. Industrial efficiency is another one. So I think humanoid robots are really going to have a massive impact in the coming years. There's exponential growth anticipated, and it's just so futuristic that if 10 years ago someone were talking about this, you would think it's so far out into the future, but it's actually happening now. It's available, it's being developed.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely interesting. I'm a bit frightened if I see those videos of the humanoid robots, but definitely also very exciting. The potential is there. Thank you so much, Cassandra, for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us. And I think with that, we'll wrap up.
Thank you.